Okay, so you've published very recently a report, The State of Enterprise AI Usage, and the report talks about an illusion of control when it comes to enterprise AI. What does that actually, mean or look like when it comes to organizations today who are clearly, well, I suspect most, if not all of them, are wrestling with AI.
Yeah, yeah, that's basically like the main theme of the paper and the subheading is like this illusion of control. Um, and I guess to try and make it concise, it's a focus on the fact that the like organizations have fairly high confidence in their ability to kind of understand and like control and govern AI tools and the relatively new AI tools in the world. But it's not quite real when we look at like the evidence or when we ask like some harder questions. So I think this is more because there's a lot of traditional kind of signals and tooling that's there that when you ask someone the question, can you, for example, do you have visibility, for example, over AI? Probably a big one. And one of their gut reactions will be, okay, well, we have logging and things like that, which we've relied on for decades and decades in many ways, pre-existing traditional technology. And so you kind of tick that box and it gives you that confidence. And you go through like a long enough list of these tick boxes and you can assign traditional controls to solve the problem. And when you step back, everything looks quite good. So then maybe when you're asked, um, do you have confidence in your ability to govern and maybe control AI usage in your organization? The instinct is for a lot of organizations is to say yes. But then at the same time, when we ask, are you discovering things like shadow AI or which is kind of use of unapproved AI technology, for example, um, is that happening? And then at the same time, they'll say, well, yeah, that is happening. So, well, about 72% of people during our research that we asked said that they had confidence in their ability to kind of govern AI and detect shadow AI. But then 65% of that same group said that they were detecting shadow AI. So that's kind of where that illusion kind of comes in.
Yeah, and in terms of that disjoint, any thoughts? I think you sort of hinted at there, but thoughts as to why businesses are relatively confident they've got this full visibility, but even they will admit when you ask them about things like shadow AI that they know it's out there, so they potentially don't have a handle. So why are they potentially confident when they shouldn't perhaps be as confident as they are?
Yeah. I think it's like I don't like I wouldn't think it's like an arrogance type thing or anything, but I think it's more of a a mindset switch that's not quite happened yet because the default I think is to kind of as I briefly mentioned a minute ago is to rely on more traditional controls. Like we have many traditional controls that have been around for decades and decades at this point, and they've survived through multiple kind of technology changes over that time as well. And they've, with tweaks here and there, but the same kind of fundamental traditional controls have existed. Tool approval process for trying to control tool use, logs for trying to have visibility, policies for trying to make sure people follow the right processes and things like that, just to kind of name some high level ones. Um, but the kind of world that we live in now with AI is not quite the same, and those tools kind of fall apart a bit because um, rather than traditionally things are rolled out in a much more controlled way, especially in enterprise. There's many hoops to jump through, and for people to get tooling, it can notoriously be a difficult and frustrating process for people that just want to get things done. Whereas AI technologies are not really rolled out like the way that AI kind of came onto the scene. It wasn't controlled by enterprise; it was controlled by users. It's access through the browser. People are using their personal accounts. People are just copy pasting things, seemingly like benign and relatively easy, just doing day-to-day work like business as usual activities. Nothing really jumps out as alarming. But this new world of AI is incredibly like high risk because of the vast amount of data. So all of those traditional tools that kind of rely on traditional signals kind of fall and fail um, when the AI tooling is just being used at such a like a huge scale in a way that's not centralized by the organization. It's kind of controlled by the users. And for example, if someone maybe tries to upload a file to some random website traditionally, there might be some data loss prevention tool that can detect that. But when you've got a portal, a web browser to the entire internet, and there's an entirety of AI tools out there now, and someone just is just copy pasting some information into that, that's not really detected the same way. So you have this lack of visibility, and that also kind of reinforces that confidence, I think, because when you try then to look at the evidence, you might see, well, actually, we're not seeing that many alerts, we're not seeing that many problems, but that's just because the more traditional approach kind of fails to detect that stuff, if that makes
And
sense.
I suppose if that sort of undetected usage was sort of safe, there wouldn't necessarily be the problem. But I suspect there is quite a risk involved in terms of again, the perceived control and the actual AI usage. So it's one thing to give your employees a little bit of freedom, but if you don't know what they're doing, perhaps not. So just your thoughts, I suppose, as to how big a risk is this AI world becoming with, I guess, particularly shadow AI, but anything else that you think matters.
Yeah, I would say it's probably one of the most important kind of emerging enterprise risks because a lot of things that we've thought about for many, and I come from like an offensive security background, so a lot of things that we kind of the mind goes to is like attacks a lot of the time, and even when we think about AI, we might think about compromise of like open AI's databases or something like that, or a data breach and things like that, and those are all very real, especially kind of the data breach side. Um, but the real kind of the big huge risk that's kind of there all day every day right now, and it's just so widespread. It's just normal use of AI tooling, really. Like it's so simple and yet high risk, um, because people now use AI whether you want them to or not. I mean, for the most part, and if you try to block it, humans will go far and wide to get past kind of blockers that you put in the way. Um, so you now have people they're not ill-intentioned, but all your employees were just trying to be more, you kind of work more efficiently and things like that, and use AI to kind of help that out. And if you approve a tool, for example, you say maybe your organization has agreed that X AI tool is okay for the organization to use, but users don't then see that as well, actually, users then see that as okay. Well, I can use that tool for everything. But from the organization's perspective, you mean well, you can use that tool, but I don't mean you can paste our intellectual property into it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the interesting thing is. Like someone will get like an email or a document, or they're trying to maybe they're trying to make something a bit more concise or digestible for a presentation, and their instinct now will just be to copy paste that into maybe their approved tool or not an approved tool, and the risk there is that massive data leak. Like if your confidential or intellectual property is then sent outside of your control, you might not detect that in this kind of AI world that we're in now, as I was kind of describing early on with that kind of uh, the illusion of control. But down the line, that may become like a fairly significant breach. So that also kind of increases how significant the risk is because it's not even something that you necessarily will detect as and when it will be hidden, and then later on there might be like a big data breach of I don't know some AI tools prompt history, and then when a bunch of criminals go through it, they just dig out a bunch of your intellectual property or people's credentials and things like that, and it becomes like an extremely big problem. So I think it's an extremely big challenge that everybody's kind of doing their best to try and solve. But yes, it's definitely an important emerging risk in the enterprise space.
And when we're talking about the risk of shadow AI, are we mainly talking about Gen AI, the tools that sort of hit the headlines first, or are we also talking about agentic AI, or is it sort of too early for that to be becoming a problem at the moment?
Well, that's interesting. So, in terms of the paper, we is kind of agnostic, I guess. But the it like agentic AI is probably just can just be as easily be explained in a similar way. One of the differences being, I mean, obviously different. They solve different solutions. So I'm not trying to say they're the same thing. But in terms of like the risk that they pose, you have on one side you have like your chat GPTs and whatever, and the problem there is the risk there, sorry, and the behaviors that we're seeing is, as I just said, people just pasting, for example, whatever, fairly simple example. On the agentic side, people are now developing, agentic development pipelines, or people are getting Open Claude or whatever it's named now. It's gone through like three or four different names, and having these little personal agents that they'll then give access to, their instant messaging, or maybe even in an extreme, their bank accounts to try and do transactions for them in some way or another, or to their online shopping and things like that. And that's outside the enterprise. But then inside the enterprise, trying to build like development workflows, optimize how security testing, and all of this. There's a lot of agents that can be involved in that, and they kind of bring in those same risks, because it's growing so quickly, that it's kind of hard to keep up, and it very quickly becomes, well, a few years ago, you could be fairly strict and know where your data is going, where it is, and how much control you have over your organizational data, for example. But now all it takes is for one kind of new AI kind of technology to become embedded into an established enterprise tool that you use, and some employees to maybe be using their own personal accounts, or whatever, and suddenly your data could be anywhere, everywhere, all at once. And then when you've got agents talking to each other, and if it's an open source agent, have you checked where all the dependencies are? Are they talking to other third party tools to kind of work? And is your data being processed? It becomes very complicated and very messy very, very quickly. So yeah, but I'd say those are some of the kind of behaviors. And then in terms of just where it is, I would, now, like I said, it's in browsers, it's embedded in established tooling. There are plugins everywhere. People bring their own devices. It's completely prolific, absolutely everywhere, and very hard to kind of control.
Yeah, so no secret, AI adoption accelerating very, very fast. Are organizations moving too fast for government's frameworks to keep up? And I suppose the part two is, I think that that the survey did find that many companies do have policies and committees in place, but the governance efforts are maybe failing to translate into real control. And I guess you've covered that a little bit, but just so, yeah, are they moving too fast? And if people do have these policies in place, why are they, not fit for purpose, or not succeeding?
Yeah. So in terms of like speed, just kind of touch on the speed thing and then the policy thing. I think in the through the research that we did in the paper, I think it was around like 65 or 67 maybe percent of people were saying that AI was already wide used. So that's already quite fast. And then 91% saying that they expect it to grow even more. So that's, fairly significant. So there's no sign of it slowing down, and it's already being adopted extremely quickly. And as I said, also user driven. So that speeds it up even more, because traditional enterprise driven adoption of technologies is a bit more methodical. But user driven adoption, which kind of forces enterprise to adapt, is extremely fast, because it's controlled by your entire user base. In terms of governance, and just kind of switch the perspective there. So not necessarily thinking about like the uncontrolled speed of adoption, but just in terms of deliberate adoption now, and in terms of governance. Yeah, I think governance is really struggling to keep up. I mean, there is obviously governance there, and there's a lot of things. There is a stat from the paper. I've got it off the top of my head, but there was a lot of organizations that we spoke to that had implemented a lot of things, policies, committees, etc. All of that good stuff that you want in terms of governance. But governance is almost static and slow, and whereas AI, as we've seen over the past few years, is extremely quick. So I mean, not long ago, agents weren't really a thing. I mean, maybe even less than a year ago, they weren't a big thing, and now they're ginormous. But governance, for example, if we think of like ISO 42001, or the future of the EU AI Act and things like that, they've not necessarily changed all that much in that time, if at all. They've been designed, established. People have started implementing them. They focus on established governance. Kind of these types of governance projects solve the challenge of what should happen. So you go through a whole process to establish it, and for the most part, its entire goal is to establish what should happen. But then what does happen is extremely dynamic, and the way that you need to solve what actually does happen in reality just doesn't keep up with the speed of AI. So it's absolutely a nice answer to that is it's absolutely progressing much faster than governance can keep up. I think it's going to be a fairly big challenge for governance to keep up. I think that they'll probably have to be some drastic changes to how they try to keep up with AI until it calms down. Because by the time you've updated some type of governance to say, well, you know what, agents are a thing, and people are organizations are developing maybe tooling now with AI in these like agentic development workflows, maybe the governance didn't really take that into consideration. And so does the governance need to then adopt to what the world is going to do? Or are they going to really stand their ground and try and pull the world back? I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure. I'm fairly confident who's going to lose that
Yeah.
battle, which is just an unfortunate reality of the situation. It's kind of like a runaway train at this point. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, and I guess sort of adding to that is that the you highlighted that I think that AI risk might be recognized, but often is underestimated. So, what are is it just because leaders don't fully understand the implications of sort of that runaway train of AI, if you like, what's going on in terms of why they don't understand the the possible downsides of AI?
This is an interesting one because I think I have like two kind of perspectives on it. And the main one I think it's mostly a visibility problem, kind of some of the stuff that I said at the beginning there, where I think the current the historic to current inability to kind of get accurate visibility into what's happening with AI in your enterprise. How it's being used, what's actually being sent, is anything being leaked? Do you have real telemetry? Do you have logs that actually capture any of it, or is it all just traditional stuff and it doesn't really tell you what's happening, which is where we've kind of been. I think just makes it difficult when asked to kind of quantify or even like qualify in a more broader term the risk. I think it makes it difficult for a solid conclusion to be made. So the instinct is then to go lower rather than higher in a lot of cases. And I think the paper showed like 45, maybe 46% were rating it as like moderate to low. So it's clearly shown that it, it's being considered quite significantly like a moderate to low risk, which you might think is a little bit alarming. But I don't think it's like an arrogance thing or like a trying to ignore the problem thing. I think it's just when you try to build these conclusions, that's kind of as good as they can do at the minute because they just don't have the evidence to support it being a more significant risk. But then if you have a conversation with someone outside of asking them to use their own telemetry and evidence to make a conclusion, you'll end up having a very deep, long conversation about lots and lots of risks, attacks, and threats that are out there, and people expressing concern around shadow AI, people expressing concern around data leaks or concern around how can we better control AI adoption, things like that. So it immediately is evident that it's considered a significant risk. So again, it's another interesting kind of um, contradiction, even. But again, I think it's just down to like that inability to have like the concrete evidence historically and up to now, without like the right tools there to get the right information.
And is it also fair to say that at this moment in time that there haven't been too many sort of AI related horror stories? So as you said earlier, if you're pasting your intellectual property into ChatGPT or something, at this moment in time, that might not be a problem for you, but at some unspecified time in the future. So is that part of the thing that there aren't any horror stories around it? I mean, everyone knows a little bit about, hallucinations and stuff like that, but presumably if you know what you're doing, you can check for that kind of stuff. But so I suppose the question there is, what are the risks organizations are facing around AI,
Mm.
unmanaged AI usage in terms of the impact that they might see, whether it's immediate or in the longer term.
Yeah. I think that's like a nice way to build off what I just said, where I kind of emphasize that contradiction piece, where there's kind of the instinct to kind of rate it as like a moderate to low, but then when you have like the kind of these one-to-one conversations, there's like immediate concern about from things in the media, and there are clear examples of data breaches and leaks where you know company information has then been, retrieved through this, or credentials and things like that, which is a fairly catastrophic and terrifying outcome for any organization. So the evidence for that is there, in addition to any type of actual attacks that may or may not be happening. Again, I'm predominantly focusing on just the risk through use, day-to-day use. Um, but yeah, so in terms of like what those actual kind of risks are, I would say that the main thing is data loss through normal use, because you have all of your users just trying to do their day-to-day work, and that's basically all it is. People will just be doing normal use as far as they're concerned, and that in of itself, if you're not keeping on top of it, or you don't have the capability to try and implement um, evidence-based kind of security controls that can actually enforce the governance that you've tried to implement, um, will lead to massive amounts of data loss. Um, so like, yeah, I think that's probably, is that the answer you were looking for? I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'd also wonder. I mean, whether reputational, because I say if you trust AI implicitly, it's not unknown that it comes up with whether it's nonsense or inaccurate information, and then whether that impacts on your customers when they
Mm.
read something that doesn't make or whatever. Is that something that people are sort of experiencing as well, or is most of that picked up before it gets out?
Yeah, that's a good point. That is again another quite nice example of something very real, because the kind of hallucination rate, if you want to phrase it like that, I would say is generally fairly high when it comes to like specific types of work or specific types of questions. I mean, there have been some amusing-ish examples of papers or something being written, or uh, legal paperwork being filed, and there being hallucinated references and things like that, and quotes and all of that, being fairly common. And even, for example, if you just mess with AI yourself and you ask it to give you some information about something or look something up, I would say it's fairly often that it's telling you something that's not quite accurate, and not quite true. So it's definitely a problem. I think that the challenge there, though, is that the belief is that when you've written a policy or an acceptable use guidance and things that say you should keep this in mind, from an organizational perspective, they then think that that's solved. But obviously, just because you've told people to be aware of it, or even if you've rolled out training, it doesn't actually change anything really, apart from hoping that they keep that in mind. But what actually happens is still going to be the same. So it's still a risk. And if then you're just disseminating that information as marketing, for example, then that could very quickly turn into like a fairly catastrophic kind of incident with your reputation, if you're saying like the wrong thing or the wrong stat, or you've named the wrong company or something like that in something you're discussing. Um, but that just didn't quite immediately come to mind when you asked me, because I was very focused on a text just then. But again,
Yeah.
a good point.
Uh, and I guess the crux of the conversation maybe is how important is real-time enforcement when it comes to point of use of AI, and what does it look like in practice? Because as you say, to a certain extent, you want to give people the freedom to use these tools because they are very powerful and positive in many ways. But at the same token, you don't want them to open up the company to losing its intellectual property or whatever it is. So is it possible to regulate and still provide people with the freedom that they want, or is that
Yeah,
something you have to give?
yeah. So I guess this is the question, right? How to try and solve this, or at least improve it in some way. Um, and I kind of hinted a little while ago that a gut reaction, I think, especially early on, was to just kind of block access to AI. But again, a fairly catastrophic outcome from that, because people, especially now that AI is so widespread, people will just use it in another way. They'll take pictures on their phone, or they'll just completely undermine anything you try to do. So the key is to like enable and encourage like the use of AI, because I mean, spoken fairly negative about it for like so far, but don't get me wrong, it's absolutely amazing, and extremely useful, and an absolute productivity multiplier. Um, but you've got to be able to do it in a responsible way, and I think the key problem has been kind of that uh, eagerness to adopt it as quick as possible has kind of been the problem there. But yeah, I think you can try to do things in like real time. That is one of the things that we try to focus on solving as well. On our side, trying to provide solutions, and there are other solutions out there as well. Trying to provide solutions that can do interventions in real time, monitor what tools are being used, trying apply some type of like actual evidence-based enforcement. Because what you want to know is you want to know what's being used, and why, and but as evidence, you don't want to just have a policy that says you can use this tool. You want to know for a fact that this tool can only be used. So you want a tool that can reliably implement that. You want to know what type of information is being shared when it's not meant to be being shared. Obviously, you want to try and avoid just knowing everything that's going on. But if you have a data leak, you want to be able to detect that somehow in real time to prevent it actually going out to the third party tools. And then you also want to know why it happened, or if it was allowed or blocked, and what the reason was for that. So you don't want to just block people. You want to maybe give them the opportunity to just reflect on what's happening. So they've tried to paste a document in or some IP, and then they get a warning maybe, and it will say something like this has confidential data. Do you want to proceed? I mean, that'd be a bit lax to give them the option to just accept that. But then if they did accept it, you'd want to trace, and have a reason why, so that you can investigate that later on, and you kind of have that evidence. So there are opportunities. Is it a solved like problem across the board? I'd probably say at the minute, like absolutely not. There's a lot of edge cases and different things to try and solve. But I think there's a lot out there that you can like adapt now to significantly improve kind of those business and give you the information you need to make more confident conclusions on what the risk to you actually is. Because you can actually have that information then to rather than it just being theoretical, it can be evidence based.
And in terms of, I mean, how do you address, because there may well be some, very sensible, justifiable reasons why people might want to put, intellectual property into some kind of AI engine. Is the importance there that it needs to be a sort of in-house, you're under your own control, than so just putting them into one of these open, you know, chat GPTs or equivalents is just a no-no, but you need to then concentrate on developing something in-house. Because I say it's a very powerful tool. You can put your information in. So to a certain extent, you don't want to restrict what people can put in there, but I get your point entirely that you don't want to let them just tell everyone everything about your company, as it were, or potential to release all that info. So how do you balance those two? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that will be like a case by case. So you want to be able to have the flexibility to make those decisions yourself, like as an organization, how restrictive you want to be, and how much risk you kind of want to take on board. And then it just becomes a balance of your own risk appetite. I mean, generally being risk averse myself, coming from a pen test background, so mostly doing security work and consultancy. I obviously lead towards the stop everything always and try and make sure everything is okay and dandy. But obviously that's not the real world. There's a gray area, and yeah, I think that's just down to the individual organization to decide. But I would say any time actual confidential information or something you determine to be sensitive intellectual property or just confidential or credentials, things like that, the more traditional things, I would say you want to at least put either like a hard block on that, because the you can still solve this. It's not just that it wouldn't just say, well, you can't do anything. The alternative would be to just ensure that the confidential information is redacted or tokenized in some way, so that what they do send is not going to expose you to any risk. So having kind of some flexibility like that is, and well, configuring, I'd say, some flexibility like that is probably key to establishing that balance in a reliable way. Um, but yeah, a very fine balance, case by case.
And I guess we've talked mainly in terms of the organizations and their sort of internal um, regulation, but I guess there's also, depending on what industry in, there's the governance. So you need to be able to demonstrate to whoever might be in charge of your industry sector or whatever, that you've done all that you could have possibly done when a breach or occurs. So where are we at with that? Or are we still in the infancy there as to producing some kind of auditable governance trail for AI usage, or is that there? It just needs people to implement it properly.
I would say like we have like a first version of that. For the most part, there's at least a couple of different forms that takes that are established, and a lot of organizations are adopting already and looking into or preparing for. Like if you think of the EU AI Act, for example, there's a lot of preparation going on in that space. So I would say that there's, the work there is at least for phase one, if you will, in terms of the world we live in now is there and been done. Going back to kind of what I was saying way back at the beginning, though, or maybe a little bit into the conversation, um, whether that is set up to succeed or not, I'm a little bit more concerned about just because I think the speed at which AI technology has been changing um, outpaces just the fundamental way a lot of these things have been written in some areas. I'm not completely undermining them. I'm just concerned that in some areas it just might not align with real world expectations and realities, I guess, at the moment. Because as I said, I mean, just in the past like year, agents have kind of gone from a non thing to a big humongous thing that that's absolutely be exploded and being used everywhere. And ISO 42001 being an example of a one of the kind of governance frameworks that exists and can be audited against. The initial draft for that was from 2023. So a lot of changes have already happened in that space of time. So yeah, I don't envy the position of governance bodies that are very much doing their best to try and help this.
And maybe just finally, yourselves, Culture AI, what is it? Where do you fit within this sort of AI landscape that we've been talking about?
Yeah, so our main focus in like the AI space is around AI usage control. So a lot of the things that that's kind of a lot of what the paper was for, was to try and get a broader picture on terms of what adoption looked like, to see if the concerns that we were focusing on solving were, actually existed outside of the interactions we'd had so far. So to just get a broader picture. Thankfully, it all kind of added up, so we're on the right track. But yeah, so the focus we have is in trying to kind of provide that flexibility that lets you have a security solution that will allow you to configure how you want to restrict AI tooling, allow you to get visibility over what AI tools are being used, even if they're like unexpected. Because we see like the default is, you might think of ChatGPT or AI agents as very easy defaults when you think AI, but in reality there are like tens and thousands of AI app tools out there that people are using for all sorts, from even like counseling to just PDF generation, and bizarrely enough spell checking. I mean, you'd wonder why we already have established spell checking technology. You don't need to paste all of your work into an AI to get the spell checking done, but people are doing it. So getting visibility over things like that and being able to restrict and prevent and direct people down um, a path that you're more comfortable with is what we focus on there, trying to provide that solution.
And final question, promise. But do you think as AI becomes more sophisticated, it will almost counterintuitively become safer because the applications will be much better designed, with security in mind, as opposed to these, I say we go back to sort of Gen AI where they're really just there for everyone to sort of use regardless.
Mm.
So when the inferencing really sort of ramps up and people are developing the AI applications, but they're, for themselves, or I say much more security focused. Do you think that's a good thing, or just because of this, I say the runaway train analogy you said, there's still going to be a large element of sort of out of controlness, if that's even a phrase, um,
Yeah,
as AI sort of continues to gain momentum.
yeah, it's another interesting one. So, I mean, I'm optimistically, and just kind of based off of how things have evolved over many years in the past, I would like to think, yeah, a few years down the line, maybe, or even sooner, hopefully. Well, to be fair, it could just be an overnight type thing at this rate with how quickly things change. There could be an advancement in AI in the coming months that solves things like prompt injection, and then that would be a humongous win in terms of security and reliability. Um, I think as big established technology, AI technologies evolved like this, I think absolutely the security of those platforms will improve. The research will improve. and it will all get much better in that space, and organizations will adapt better, and policies will be in place, and tooling will exist that will allow us to more reliably do things, like enforce those governance and those policies properly. Now, whether there's still going to be a big runaway train for a while, I think that's probably going to be around for a little while, because just so many people are building so many AI tools all the time now. I mean, I mean, obviously, it will need to end at some point, and AI will just become the status quo. It won't be such a novelty anymore. Not that it's quite a novelty at the minute, but I'm just not sure how soon that'll be.
No, it's been great to chat, and thank you so much for sharing so many great insights into what is, as we discussed, a fast-moving AI landscape, which is fascinating. I think exciting on balance. So really appreciate your time, Oliver. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for talking. I appreciate it. It's been fun.